What happens when the world's most connected, value-driven, and outspoken generation steps into the world of logistics? You get disruption with a purpose. In this episode of the Supply Chain Lab, we're joined by a global supply chain voice, Sofia, and business growth lead, Lethabo, to explore how Gen Z is shaking up everything we thought we knew about sustainability, transparency, and the future of work. From TikTok trends influencing ethical sourcing to young professionals demanding purpose-driven careers, this isn't a phase. It's a full-blown shift. Buckle up for a dynamic conversation on what the next generation expects, what businesses must do to keep up, and how the future of supply chain is being rewritten in real time. But before we dive in, Sofia, let's start with you. For listeners who may not know about your work, could you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into the world of supply chain?
So much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here in this podcast. I think I've been following since last year, and it's so interesting to see that there are other people in supply chain joining and sharing their perspectives. I'm Sofia Rivas. I am from Guadalajara, Mexico. I have a background in industrial engineering, and I have been working in supply chain for almost 6 years, from airport operations to also e-commerce retail, and now in electronic and um, yeah, other gadgets manufacturing. Today, I have a podcast also called Supply Chain Now en Español, which is basically where we share stories of people who speak Spanish around the world and that are in this industry and in this field. And yeah, I'm very passionate about the topic, about this industry, and I love sharing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Lethabo, can you tell us about yourself and what sparked your interest in business growth and how it ties into today's conversation about Gen Z and the future of work?
All right. Thank you so much. First and foremost, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. You're doing great work, and I believe the conversations you're driving on this platform are essential just for our construct and overall our nation. And I mean, my journey really, good to see you also, Sophia. My journey starts in college. This is about actually a year ago, interestingly, whereby I studied a Bachelor of Arts in Strategic Brand Communications. So I left high school just sort of with the mental disposition that I want to be a marketer. I want to go into marketing because I love marketing. And as a result of that, in my third year of college, I was a little bit confused as to what I should do. So I pursued a certificate of completion in entrepreneurship at the Joseph Business School whilst completing my third year in college. And yeah, before I knew it, I developed a relationship with one of the board members of the Joseph Business School, which happens to be my CEO, Siyabonga Gule, and he onboarded me into BPO. I've been at BPO now for a little bit over a year. Started off in a marketing role for about 6 months, and then was promoted into a business growth lead role, which I've been there for about 8 months. So BPO is an acronym that stands for Business Excellence and Process Optimization. So the main focus of our business model at BPO is how do we strategically source for our clients on a perspective that impacts positively and constructively on their lead times, cost optimizations, and specifications as well. So yeah, that's how I was introduced into supply chain. For me, didn't have a supply chain background, didn't study supply chain, but I found myself in it, and I'm having a great time and I'm loving it.
Okay, thanks for sharing, Lethabo. So just to start off the conversation, Sophia, you've been at the forefront of the conversation about Gen Z, the impact on supply chains, and some of the biggest shifts that you've seen so far. Can you just share with us what are some of the biggest shifts you've seen so far and what you've learned in driving this conversation?
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that I would say is like, no, we should no longer only focus on Gen Z, but also Gen Alpha, because they are also joining the workforce. And there we can see also a lot of differences from what we've seen before. But apart from that, I would say that it is interesting the context in which we're working on right now, because there are more than four generations collaborating in one um, company or in one team. And the differences in age, in the way of thinking, in the way of how do we relate to work, and how which things do we appreciate the most are very different from one generation to another. So I would say that for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, um, there is even less, I would say, this sense of sacrificing your life for your job and keep and staying at a place to build this trajectory or this long career that we want to pursue. It's no longer just defined or attached to one job, so they see it as okay, we can gain this experience from multiple jobs and from multiple companies. So how are we able to retain talent and also to let it go when they should go, right? And I'm not saying letting go as firing, but more importantly, like if you see growth, how do you push this growth and these people to better places and better options? So I think the way in which we should redefine our jobs is how can we make it more appealing, and how can we redefine the task that we're doing so that it is more valuable to have people doing them. Because if we're seeing all these tools and all this technology that has the potential of helping us, the first one that will tell us that they're doing redundant job or job that is meaningless would be Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Okay. I think you brought in some good perspective, Sophia. Can you just touch in on some of the differences that you do see between Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and how companies are scrambling basically to ensure that they do align with these two groups of, I guess, the new workforce?
Sure. So I think previously I would say that um, let's say generations such as boomers or Gen X and also even millennials, they were rewarded or they felt rewarded at work by, let's say, monetary or salary increments, and also by um, perhaps the relationships that they build at work. Now with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, these relationships are have been diminished also because of the way we work. We no longer work fully face to face or fully at the office. We work at hybrid environments in which also relationships are harder to build and sustain throughout time, right? So the way in which we relate to our coworkers and to our boss even uh, could be even more remote than in person. So this also adds a barrier between a barrier that perhaps is not visible, but that keeps us from connecting at a personal level, I would say. And the other thing is that Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they put a lot of meaning in their personal health and mental health. So whenever they're not feeling at their 100%, this is when they start showing it in the way they work and in their deliverables. So finding this balance of how can we make them feel more connected to their teams and to their work, as well as how can we sustain this ideal environment in which they feel that they are able to work and show their 100% and even more. That's something that we will keep struggling, because also this 100% idea is being challenged by these generations. Like, why should we show our 100% or not?
Mm-mm. And I just want to touch on like some of the trends maybe you've seen in your country. Are you seeing like I don't know, with some of the big organizations that are in Mexico? Are you seeing that they are struggling with the behavior of Gen Z? Like, are you finding that a lot of the employees are a much older generation because of that disconnect? Or are you seeing that Gen Zs are kind of forced to adapt to this like the old way of working?
well, because of, and I think this is very similar also to South Africa, because of how our demographics are and our population are composed, we are more, our population is younger than in other countries. So our workforce is therefore very young. And I would say that one of the first struggles is the new yeah, the early careers or the new hires are the ones that are adapting to older ways, but trying to break this mold of this is the way we've worked and this is how it has always been. So how can we innovate in the ways we're doing? The thing is, like, whenever they don't feel they can break this mold, they move to another place where they can. And this is because there we do have many possibilities now, and we're very well connected to a lot of other companies and other so the possibilities of finding another job are higher than perhaps in other times, right? And also this perception of how would I be perceived by others if I leave my job, if I've just been like 3 months here, it doesn't matter anymore, right? I would say, like, one of the things is that I have been seeing is whenever you don't find this balance of motivation and feeling connected and feeling meaningful, you start seeing a lot of quiet quitting, which is just doing the bare minimum and not communicating how you actually feel, but just letting it um, run for as long as you can until you get noticed that maybe you're not interested in what you're doing. So a lot of it is showing, yeah, this bare minimum and this like zero connectedness with what they're doing.
And Lethabo, what has been your experience within South Africa when you look at some of the people in your organization or your friends? Like, do you agree with what Sophia has shared, or are you seeing slight differences?
Yeah, great point, Sophia. I love that. I think just to touch a little bit on what you spoke about on there being a platform for growth. I think organizations, entrepreneurs, business owners need to rethink their leadership disposition as to say, how do we shift the perspective from you just being an employee working function to you coming in and us being able to see a trajectory of growth in your career. And I think that's important. We need to rethink, how do we set up platforms for Gen Zs, as Sophia has mentioned, Gen Alpha as well, to grow in the organization? Is there a growth plan for a Gen Z who comes into our organization? And for me, I'm a testament of that from my career journey, is to say I started off in a particular role. Now I'm in a role that, yes, there are connections, but the intensity of responsibility and just the description of the role is completely different, but there's growth there and it's measurable growth. You can track the growth. So we need to, so leaders need to rethink that, as to say, how do we set them up for growth? Because touching on what Sophia mentioned, the meaning and purpose part, and we spoke about that, and research proves that as well. Deloitte published a publication now on how Gen Zs would rather work for an organization that pays less, but there's a sense of meaning and purpose attached to their role, as opposed to being in an organization that pays more, but there's no sense of meaning and purpose. And I think the disposition of Gen Zs now is to say, let's ask the question that hasn't really been asked before, which is, why? You know, why do I come to work? Why should I work for this company? Why should I get up in the morning? And that boils down to the word purpose. And I think through my observation and through my encounter as well, sharing my story, I joined BPO not even having a conceptual understanding or profound understanding of the business model. But what drew me to the organization was the purpose that was attached to the organization and to their business model. So I think it's important for us to rethink that as well, and also the purpose part is very essential. But to touch on your question, shift. So shift I've observed, and I'm excited about this shift in particular. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Sophia, is the shift from traditional communication hierarchies to a more flatlined, open, and collaborative communication model. So now, in the previous age, we've seen communication hierarchies be from senior level to junior level down. And oftentimes there's certain things that probably you don't know, and there's a disconnect, like Sophia said, like the motivation is no longer there. But now, even through our operations and through just how we work, I'm noticing how communication is now open. It's collaborative, and the same conversation I'm having at the operation could be, uh, I mean, I could have the same conversation in the boardroom because initially it should be aligned. We should be going to a particular goal. And I'm loving that shift because I'm also seeing a lot of Gen Zs come alive and be bold, be courageous to speak and to talk. I mean, at first, I mean, and I think tech in the digital age that we're in now has made it so easy where accessibility is concerned. Because I mean, I had a friend of mine the other day say to me, "You're always with your CEO. I've never met my CEO." And I thought about that and to think about how it's just the accessibility piece. It's so important. I mean, now we got tech. You can just send your CEO a DM, on LinkedIn or. But what I'm saying is that shift of communication is to say it's becoming more open, and it's becoming more flatlined as opposed to hierarchical. Is my observation, and I'm loving it.
Okay. Okay, I hear what you're saying. And what are your thoughts around collaboration, Sophia? Because you did mention that because of now the job market being more hybrid versus, I mean, he's saying communication is much better, but you said because of the hybrid kind of workforce, what we're missing now is probably the relationship piece of how organizations are now being built, which mattered to the previous generations versus the Gen Z now. Do you think relationships are still as important as they were, or has tech kind of changed how relationships are being built?
Well, I think it depends, right? It sounds like, for example, for Lethabo, his experience has been quite the opposite, right? Communication has improved. This closeness that he has and the ability and accessibility that he has for his higher managers and CEO, that's something that he has experienced as very positive and feels that like it's changing. I think it depends on where you're working and how your teams are built, especially if you are in a global company with people with a team that is not only local, but they also are in different cities and in different time zones. I think another factor that plays in is these multicultural differences that you will find. So I feel like if your team is um yeah, it's local, then you have this ability to feel more connected. When you're also having to work with people from other cultures and other backgrounds, I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's different and a bit difficult at the beginning, especially if you don't have the flexibility to understand where they're coming from and how are they different from you, but not in a personal way, right? It's not like a and I always share this kind of experience when I started working at a global company. I received email. I in Mexico we're very kind and we love to give a lot of context to things. So my emails will be like 1 page long, right? And at the very end, asking like, "Hey, could you help me with this and that, please?" And other cultures that are, I don't know, from the north part of Europe are very direct and would prefer if I just told them what I needed, right? So that kind of differences are the ones that you will experience in a global company or international corp. Um, and the thing is like, okay, how do you stay connected or how do you build relationships regardless of them being hybrid and remote? this is very hard, especially if your leaders are not the ones that are um, pushing for it to happen, right? Eh, and again, it comes back to, okay, what are the values or what are the things that your leaders value? Eh, and that is very influenced by their culture and the generation they belong to.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I can definitely relate to that, Sophia. Having worked as a South African for global organizations, there is usually that disconnect with people that are from different markets. Like, obviously, the Europeans prefer things in a particular way, and they are more timely. Like in South Africa, we're not as like 8 o'clock is like 5 past, between 5 past 8 and like 10 past 8. No, nobody's actually going to arrive at 8 o'clock. So I definitely do agree with those kind of differences when looking at global organizations and some of the, um, I guess, the things that you kind of have to navigate without taking the other person's behavior personally, to say like it's not because they have an issue with me per se, but it's just like a different culture and a different way of thinking and being. So yeah, I can definitely relate to the example that you gave. So now I think we should just move into the sustainability piece. Now there's been quite a growth in like a lot of organizations using marketing slogans about sustainability. What are some of the real and measurable ways supply chain can be more ethical and eco-friendly? I don't know if you want to start.
All right,
Lethabo.
yeah, I can go for it. I think one of the ways has to do with having a more integrated view into the partnerships and the suppliers that you onboard in your supply chain. I was reading an article published by Oracle that it's now a standard for suppliers to be audited. Do you comply when it comes to the preservation of the planet and also in your operations as well? So I think one of the ways to make it practical, measurable, is to say, let's take a look at our partners. Let's take a look at our suppliers, our vendors, and let's find out. Let's dive deep into what are their processes where sustainability is concerned. What are their systems? What are their objectives and goals? And you, which leads me to the second point, which is education. Is to say we've got the responsibility to ask ourselves as leaders in these organizations is to say, are we really internally first? Are we educating our teams where sustainable practices are concerned? Are they informed consciously as to why these are important? And we spoke about this, that the sustainability component has to be integrated into the business strategy. We all have to get it for it to make meaningful and tangible impact. Not only relying on a particular division or department in the business to drive sustainability, but it forces us to say, how do we ensure that every division, every department, every component of the business has an educational understanding and background on why are we actually moving towards preserving the planet, why are we doing it, and what are the impacts that it has. So I'd say, yeah, that auditing of your partners and, diving deep into what are their sustainable principles, do they have any? And then secondly is the education, and start internally, educate your team members and drive measurable initiatives that provide that education. And I think organizations that are driving the sustainability conversation in South Africa are doing well. I mean, Heineken Beverages is very immense on that currently. Smart procurement, and I love the future of sustainability as well. Just to say, let's have the conversation because everything starts there. Let's talk about it first and drive that educational aspect. So yeah, those two measurable ways for me are efficient.
Okay. And you, Sophia, what are your views around this?
I just want to highlight that Lethabo didn't start by saying recycling or cutting out CO2 emissions because I feel like that would be the first answer many supply chain professionals would say. But that's not true. I mean, those are, let's say, the actions that follow. But I loved what you said about it is very important first to how do we build sustainability within the company's culture by educating, by showing why is it impactful, and then from there moving on to things like working with our suppliers and our network, from procurement to distribution, in which we all are on the same page. I think that's fundamental, and without those two things, it doesn't work. And we've seen it not work many times, right? I think another thing is, you should definitely, the first thing before acting, you should definitely start measuring. Many people do not measure and do not even know where their hotspots in their supply chain are. So if you don't know how negatively or how good you're impacting the environment, then how do you expect to improve? No. So one of the things that I would say is, like, for organizations, please do seek for guidance on how to measure your impact and how to standardize into this global framework. I think it's valuable, and we like it when you take the initiative to measure it yourself. But sometimes these are not tied to a global standard, so therefore, perhaps you're not doing it in the right way, or in a way in which other companies can also join and help you achieve your goals. So measure. Once you identify how badly are you doing, then start having targets around it, and from those targets you derive the actions that perhaps many people answer. um, but yeah, like, there are global organizations like, the GHG, or even the B Corp organization that helps you certify and understand how well you're doing or not. These are the type of institutes that you should be reaching out to start um, knowing how well you're doing. And do not feel like if your business is small, because you're small, then you don't have a negative impact on your business or in the environment. I think every drop counts. So I think even smaller companies have a better opportunity of tackling their impact to the environment, because of the way in which they are built and how decisions are made. These are faster than in larger corporations. So take advantage of that and do reach out to these institutions.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about that. I also think it's just good auditing practice to rather bring an external organization to kind of measure whether what you're doing is impactful, and what are the things that you need to change within your organization. I think it is good to audit yourself as an organization, and the only way you can really do that is by bringing out an external organization. So Sophia, I also want you to just touch on the role of the consumer, because we're seeing in industries such as like the fast fashion kind of industry, where people are buying the latest clothing. Consumer practices or consumer behavior is not aligned with organizations' sustainable practices. What are your thoughts around how the fashion industry, for example, can maybe improve and introduce sustainable practices when actually the consumers are interested in fast fashion and in those changes?
So I feel like it's a bit contradictory for consumers, especially when we're saying that Gen Z and Gen Alpha or are very interested in sustainability and demand greener practices and products. And then we go seeing how they purchase and how they expect things to happen. And for me, that's yeah, it's very contradictory, because how are you saying that you care about the planet and just go and behave in such patterns that do not match your words? Um, so I feel like one of the issues would be accessibility. How are we making clothes in fast fashion that is, I would say, sustainable and socially responsible? Is it accessible in terms of money to these generations or not? Um, the other thing is like, okay, if you as a consumer do prefer fast fashion and this instant gratification from new clothes and new products and are driven by all these trends that you see on social media, then also follow all the things that these retailers are doing to kind of counterattack uh, their negative impact. What are some of these practices? So one is all the clothes that you no longer wear, they're receiving it and recycling the textiles from it and doing the clothes that you're buying. So, for example, one of the, I would say, biggest fast fashion retailers, H&M, has been doing this for, I would say, the last 5 years. So if you're a consumer and you didn't know about this, then I would recommend reaching out and reading whenever you go and purchase, because at the cashier, that's where you'll see that they are receiving your clothes and recycling. And the tags in your clothes would say this is from a recycled textile. And so all these practices that perhaps are tedious for the consumer or effort with a lot of effort, I would say that um, try to start building it into your lifestyle so that you're able to, uh, yeah, to walk the talk that you're saying. So what you're demanding and also putting it into practice. So if you're demanding sustainable, then be sustainable as well. So all these things, circular economies in which you rent clothes rather than buying clothes, and you have the access to all these new trends, but you're not buying. You're just in this sharing economy of renting new items for that certain period of time.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen quite a bit of growth, even in this market, with regards to organizations that are now offering the rent model, so that for those people that maybe are going out to events or I don't know, they don't necessarily need to buy new clothing. It's one, I think, more cost effective, and I guess also because the trend with the younger generation, like Gen Z, is they not living in like big houses, they're living in much smaller spaces, so it makes more sense for them to rather rent the outfits than for them to actually buy that particular item and keep it in their houses. They just, I think we just don't have space, or the younger generation just doesn't have space as what the older generation had in the past. So I definitely see a change in this as well. Then let's have just around the future of work when it comes to Jay-Z and reshaping of careers. So Gen Z isn't just influencing supply chains as consumers, like we said, with regards to some of the fast fashion kind of trends. They're also entering the workforce with new expectations. How should businesses adapt to attract and retain young talent?
Great question. I think the first point, which we touched on in the introduction, was that sense of purpose, being clear and concise with the purpose of the organization, and secondly, the vision of it. I think it's important to understand that vision must be casted. And I look at in my experience, I get a sense of profound understanding when the vision is casted as to what my role is in the organization. I think we need to focus on how do we develop constructs within the organization that keep the vision in front of mind, whereby the Gen Zs are working, so that it, even when Sophia touched on that, you're feeling demotivated, but there's a greater sense of vision as to why you do what you do, and as to why the organization does what it does as a whole. And the second one, so this purpose, I'll align that with vision. The second one I'll say is, and this is an interesting one, I'd love for you both to chime in on this one, is exploring a shift in terminology. And when you just see how Gen Zs are and how we are, terminology is very important to us, you know. And the definition, I believe that how the definition of a particular thing determines how you fulfill it. So we're shifting, man, terminology from you're just an employee to you're part of the team, you know, and to partnership, collaboration. You touched on that. So we need to revisit the terminology that we've been using and ask ourselves, is this going to work in the long run? How we address our team members, how we even address why we do what we do, how we define why we do what we do. The shift in terminology is very essential. And also, I would touch on just leadership. We spoke about this. I'd touch on the leadership part, which is where the cost and vision part comes in, which is very important. But I think that I love that point in the beginning on setting up a platform for growth, for those who are working in an organization. Is can they grow here? And I should feel like I can grow here. Of course, it's going to take work, but I should see myself growing internally, and I should see myself growing externally, professionally, etc. So yeah, leading the way and just changing the way that we lead, more on a collaborative approach, more on an open-minded approach, as well as to say being open to exchanging ideas. I think it's John Maxwell that says the best idea that wins is the one that's good. It's not mine or yours. This is the good idea that we've reached. So being open to exchanging ideas with your team members and seeing things from different perspectives. So I believe, that those are great ways in which you can attract, your organization can attract and also retain young talent.
Okay. And Sophia, what are some of the trends you've seen on your side, and how do you believe businesses need to adapt to attract and retain young talent?
I think this constant road of educating your workforce is one of the things that keeps talent engaged and feeling not only that they're growing within their organization and their career path, but also personally and professionally. So I feel like this part of investing in talent and helping them build the skills for the future, that's something that we should definitely keep an eye on, and that should be coming back, because I think because of all these high attrition that we're seeing, many companies have decided to stop investing in that, because the initial premise is, why should I keep investing in educating my workforce if my workforce is constantly leaving? But I think that one of the ways to cut or break this vicious cycle is actually keep investing in educating your workforce.
Yeah, I do agree with that, Sophia. I guess because then they also feel like you value them as an organization and you want them to grow and you want them to upskill with the latest skills that are required. What do you believe some of the key skills are for the Gen Z generation and the Gen Alpha as well? What do you think some of the key skills are?
So one of the things that I see that it's missing and we should start really working on is critical thinking. So how do we look at a problem, understand it, and then find ways to solve it, as well as this ability to synthesize or summarize uh, big pieces of information, regardless of the uncertainty and volatility. So you will not all the time have all the pieces of the puzzle, but how are you able to take assumptions and say, okay, even though I'm missing this piece, how am I able to take decisions, or how am I able to drive change? These are the skills that I feel Gen Z and Gen Alpha should really start exercising and having them in their lives.
Anything you want to add to that?
I love it, Sophia. The first one, critical thinking. I'd align my one with that to say problem solving. You touched on problem solving. It's just understanding that there are shifts to particularly in our industry. I mean, there's global impacts, there's leadership impacts, governmental and political impacts. You've got to be on your toes where problems are concerned. And I believe organizations are now looking for problem solvers. And you can just imagine the number of problems that arise where supply chain is concerned. I see this daily. It could be logistics, could be lead times, could be cost optimization, it could be anticipating client needs. So for you to anticipate client needs, it means you always need to be in a disposition whereby you know you have a correct conceptual understanding of the nature of operations for the clients or the customers that you service, so that when the need arises, that's not when you act, but you've got a proactive construct embedded into your way of working and your way of doing things. And that goes back to what Sophia was saying, which is the educating part. You know, you need to always be prioritizing knowledge, because if you know better, you do better. And that organizations should focus on educating and upskilling their workforce, because you need that problem solving edge. So I love that one. The first one, critical thinking. The second one, I believe, touches a little bit to what Sophia mentioned at the beginning, which is because of the hybrid model, because of just how tech has evolved and digital constructs have evolved, we can work from anywhere in the world. But I believe that you need the skill set of prioritizing strong relationships. And that's important because relationships are the epitome of supply chain. I mean, if you think about how different components are interconnected together, operations, there's technical, procurement, there's sourcing, there's logistics. There are people behind these divisions. And you need to have an understanding of how each one works. And one of the best ways, and I've seen this, one of the best ways to have an understanding of how something works in your organization is by asking questions. And so that prioritizing strong relationships, you need that relational edge as a Gen Z, or even just as a young person entering the workforce. And when you prioritize strong relationships, that's where you work on your communication, you work on your posture. And I love what you said earlier about how understanding how European people may act in certain ways. Even in your own country, there's just different personality types. There's different people who have different personalities, right? Doesn't even have to be in a different country. Just walk into a room. Those people are different. They have different outlooks on the world. They have different methods of thinking, different values. So it's important. What will set you apart as a Gen Z, or just even a supply chain professional, is understanding how to build strong relationships and looking beyond the person and having a conceptual understanding of the cause. As I say, sometimes you just have to put certain things aside, and drive the cause and drive the vision forward. So yeah, problem solving, prioritizing strong relationships. And I'd add one, which is adaptability and agility. Like I touched on, the business model is changing. It's complex now, and there's so many ripple effects that come with it. I mean, even now, 104% increase tariffs on Chinese goods, right? That has an immense ripple effect on on supply chain in general, whether you're in the automotive industry, manufacturing, construction. We service ports, rail, and engineering, so it has an immense, extreme impact on us and our business model as well. So being able to adapt and being agile through it all, I think, is an essential skill that you need as a supply chain professional entering the workforce.
Yeah, I mean, I think relationships is what kind of moves you in finding work and in growing your career as well. I think the relationships are quite key, so I like that you brought that up. So Sophia, you've built a strong presence in the supply chain space through podcasting and thought leadership, which didn't exist in the past. I mean, this is quite a new kind of industry. What advice do you have for professionals looking to make an impact beyond their daily jobs?
So I would say that especially now there are a lot of opportunities to take a stand and share what you've learned or your interest in learning. And I would say, like, I would invite you to be part of the conversation and the events that occur either in your city, your country, or your continent, and then the whole world. Um, we would love to see more of you attending these type of events and being part of them. I think it's important, and also because one day you'll become the leaders of this industry. So why not start connecting with the current leaders that are there and start learning from what they have to share and what their experience has been.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I love that, which speaks to the power of mentorship, right, Sophia? Like, if there's someone or people who have walked the path, I can learn from them, and that requires also something from my end. It requires a responsibility on my end to be teachable, because it's one thing to be taught something, but whether you're able to retain it and apply it is dependent on your teachability. And I think we need to develop that quality, is to say, I don't know it all, and there's so much that I can learn. And just remain teachable just in our journeys, in our professional journeys and professional careers, so that, like Sophia is saying, I mean, I can attend a conference, and it's really the value in me attending the conference is in what I've learned and what I can apply in my domain, right? So in my domain. Otherwise, the knowledge was just knowledge. So knowledge applied is essential. So which speaks to that aspect of teachability. I think is very important, especially in our generation now. There's so much we can learn, and you can learn. And now, I mean, we are ahead. I mean, digitally, and we just need to posture ourselves to be teachable.
Okay. And with e-commerce and digital platforms basically transforming supply chain and logistics, what are some of the big disruptions we should be watching for, Sophia?
Well, specifically, I would say, well, obviously, all the geopolitical instability and disruption that we're seeing with tariffs, that's something to look out for, because it will start pushing us towards rethinking the way in which our supply chains are built, and maybe thinking of doing shorter supply chains, more regional sourcing, and looking for ways into how can we be more resilient without depending on others, and which is something that I would say with caution. So just because we're doing this, it doesn't mean that we're closing everything to each country. We'll still be connected, and we'll still have these influence from other countries as well. But yeah, those are the things that we should watch on. Another thing is like emerging economies and their growth in not only e-commerce, but innovations in the way in we're doing economic transactions and payments. Those are the things that are growing a lot and that we're leading. And I think also, yeah, first world countries should start looking at our practices for that, because we're very good at that last mile and reaching places that are very hard to reach, as well as having all these um, array of ways in which you can pay and receive money.
Yeah,
I mean, I love that, because I think in South Africa we have a similar issue. There are a lot of the population is sitting in hard to reach kind of places, and it is quite important that your global supply chain, and we see this mostly with like the beer kind of companies that are able to ensure that they have stock of these items in those kind of communities, because that's actually where most of the money is sitting for some products. And then Lethabo, if you could imagine one part of the global supply chain that would make it more sustainable, which part would this be, and why?
I'd like to just add on what Sophia said to answer that question. The driving the regional supply chains, and I think for me, global supply chains can be more effective with a solid strategy for our regional supply chains, which is how do we drive localization. Now, this is also how do we upskill manufacturing capacity, manufacturing capabilities in our country. I mean, for us in South Africa, that's an essential mandate that we have to tap into, is empowering local communities, and those who don't have, we have an unemployment rate of about 30%, 9%, which is graduate unemployment. So the question for us should be, yes, global supply chains are important, but we should also be looking at different strategies and agendas to empower and uplift regional supply chains through also one of the ways, and we do it in our business, one of the ways is to keep the OEMs in which we do business with accountable, as to say, this is the amount of business that we do in partnership with you. How can, as a result of that, we upskill and empower people in our local communities where our operations run? And as a result of that, you grow the skill sets of people, you get them certified by and through the OEM, and that way you contribute toward GDP, gross domestic product. And I think it's important for us to understand that as much as we have global mandates to be concerned about and to be proactive on, let's look at home, and let's ask ourselves, how can we transform regional supply chains? How can we also invest more in manufacturing capabilities in our country, which is very important considering the high amount of unemployment that we have, but also just the potential that we have as a country. And I think that education piece is so important because education provides access and access provides opportunity. And I think we also have to keep ourselves accountable to say, how are we driving the education construct? I mean, one of our purpose handles at BPO is educating communities, and it's essential because when you educate those who don't have, those who may not even watch this podcast episode, who may not even be able to watch this podcast episode, but as a result, you contribute towards the growth of the economy and you contribute towards the livelihoods of those who contribute toward the economy. So I think that's important. I love that piece. Regional supply chains, localizations, driving more of local procurement. How can we, develop policies that keep businesses that do, or foreign businesses that do business in our country, to drive local procurement spend? That's a conversation we need to have, is to say, how do we onboard effective, efficient suppliers, vendors and partners that are local, that do the job because they are, and how do we empower them to scale? Because as a result of that, we grow the economy and we create jobs, which is something that we need to be very intentional about and have a full understanding and view of.
And Sophia, is this the same in your country? Would you agree with some of the things Lethabo's touched on with regards to localization?
I think in some parts it does, and it is part of the Mexico's new economic agenda. It is something that we are looking at because of all the threats that we are having from our north neighbors. But I would say that I think everyone in the world is looking at um, new ways of redefining how they're sourcing, how they're delivering, and where do they rely on, who they rely more than others to keep growing.
And just to wrap up the conversation, what would you say are some of the key lessons that people should think about when we're thinking about the future of supply chain, and what are some of the key takeaways you'd like people to take from today's episode?
I'll say three takeaways from this episode, and those are three things that you should consider on the future of supply chain. One is definitely all the time you'll find new generations joining with new values and new weight on what they prefer, or what it's meaningful for them. So keep in mind that you have to constantly be adapting to your workforce to that. And the second thing would be sustainability should already be part of your culture, and you should already be measuring um, your impact. If you're not doing those two things, then you're late to the party, and you'll probably not contribute in a positive way, and in the future will not be relevant. Because I believe that supply chains will one day all be circular. So those are just the first initial steps that you should be having. And the third thing would be, um, regardless of the future being uncertain, which is something that I would say that's a constant in supply chain, um, do not hesitate on making decisions. And if you are feeling this, this need of uh, stopping and rethinking, I would say reach out to not only your peers but also your competitors. I think there's always something that you can learn from them, and I love that part from what Lethabo was saying about stay teachable.
Okay, thank you very much, Sofia. Lethabo, what are your final thoughts?
I love those. I think just to add on those, I'd add, I love those, especially the part about integrating sustainability into your culture. I think that's so essential. That's a great takeaway right there. As you can just ask yourself, how can this be a part of our culture? I love that. I'd just add, and this one is very important because just looking, this can even go broad beyond just supply chain professionals, but professionals in general, taking into consideration the future of work, is the importance of staying relevant in your industry, internal and external. And how you do that is number one, educating yourself, and we've discussed that. So the takeaway you can take from this is educating yourself. It's like there are platforms that are driving meaningful and impactful conversations, and it's important for me to be in touch with those in alignment with my profession and in alignment with my career. So that, and also, like I said, internal, so that's education, educating yourself. External is understanding the rise of the concept of personal branding. And I think that's important because, Sophia, you're doing this well. Shuke, you're also doing this well. Is how can I provide value in my industry beyond just going to work? And now we have technology, we've got social media, which then poses a question onto us as to say, how can I use the resources that I have at my disposal? This is especially important for Gen Zs entering the workforce. Utilize the resources at my disposal as a tool to advance me professionally, as opposed to only consumption. You know, I mean, social media is built for consumption, but you can use it to enable you to be relevant in your industry. And nobody's saying enable you to be an influencer with a lot of followers, but we're just saying enable you to build the right relationships. We touched on how the rise of tech is impacting relationships negatively, but I think we can contest that and say we could also use the rise of tech to enable us to have more relationships, enable us to have connections like these where we're speaking in Africa and you in Mexico, and we're driving meaningful impact in our profession, and we need more of those. So take that as a key learning, as to say, how do I how do I create value beyond just my role, beyond just what I'm required to do at work, but how can I position myself to become a key person of influence in my industry? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. I think we've come to the end of today's recording. Thank you so much for joining us, Sophia. We know it's a little bit early still that side, and we really appreciate you making time to come on the podcast.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate you both. And yeah, hope everyone that listens to this episode find at least one meaningful thing to take away and apply to their life and their work in supply chain.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lethabo.
Thank you, Sophia.
Okay.
Thanks, Luke.